You curious to see how Cooper Flagg's going to transition to college? Well, we're going to find out early and often how he's going to do because Duke has a loaded non-conference slate.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your host. This fine fellow is Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Shade. Andy, I see that little Shaka over there from the islands. I love it. You're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We want to thank you for making us your first listen or watch and remind you that you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. We want to send a special shout out to all of you everydayers joining us and all the members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Welcome in. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Hey, in these dog days of summer, the sports, they just stop sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Andy, it's a Friday show. We're heading into the weekend, and we got some news to talk about, which is exciting. Marquette and Georgetown have both recently made some good big moves, big, quite literally in Georgetown's case, on the recruiting trail. Arizona and UCLA, no longer conference frenemies, set up a trio of matchups over the next 4 years. We're going to get to all of that, though, after we start by talking about Duke's epic and loaded non-conference schedule. And Andy, wild that we can say that about it, and they're not even playing in an MTE this year. Pretty crazy stuff. Good on Jon Scheyer and company. So I'm going to toss it to Andy, folks, to lay out this schedule for us. As he does that, for those of you watching on YouTube, I'm going to pull up the schedule so you can see it at the same time. Andy, hit us.
Yeah, we were talking offline about it and like wanting to stay positive because I think a lot of the conversations that we've had, and I've had a few of these on my Locked On Zag show as well, is kind of focusing on the teams that aren't scheduling particularly competitive non-conference schedules, and we're seeing that a lot with some high major programs who are just aren't putting together particularly competitive schedules. And it was a big storyline last year when Brad Brownell called out the Big 12, and we kind of had some conversations about that. But I think it's worth celebrating when we see high-profile programs, and there's very few, if any, programs more high-profile than Duke, when they go out there and set up a schedule that has a lot of competition in it. So I'm going to read through the games here. Obviously, they do have some bye games, as you always expect them to, but the quality of opponent overall here is outstanding. Obviously, they start out with their Countdown to Craziness, their Midnight Madness event. That's going to be on October 4th. A month later is when the season officially kicks off, and they will be playing Maine in that game. There's a little intrigue with that game in Cooper Flagg as well. November 8th, they take on Army. 4 days later, November 12th, is their first really big game. That is Kentucky as part of the Champions Classic. The game will be in Atlanta. Then they take on Wofford at home. Then they go on the road. Their only true road game at Arizona. Of course, the return game from last year when Duke lost. At home against Arizona. Now they go ahead and try to return that favor to Tommy Lloyd's team in Tucson. November 26th, they take on Kansas. They go from at Arizona to taking on Kansas in Las Vegas. No feast week for them, no MTEs, but they are going to have some really tough games in that period of time with that game against Kansas. Then they head back home, take on Seattle University on the 29th. Take on Auburn on December 4th. So you have Arizona, Kansas, Seattle, and Auburn as a 4-game stretch there. That Auburn game is part of the ACC SEC Challenge. That'll be at home for the Blue Devils. December 10th, Tuesday, they take on Incarnate Word. A week later, December 17th, they take on George Mason. And then their final non-conference game will be in February. We always love seeing these fun non-conference games later in the season during the traditional conference slate. That's the case for Duke on Saturday, February 22nd. Man. They will take on Illinois at the Madison Square Garden. That's going to be an incredibly fun basketball game as part of what is shaping up to be one of my favorite non-conference schedules in all of college basketball here for the Blue Devils.
Andy, right with you. Let's just start at the end right there, right? Like, massive shout out to Jon Scheyer and to Brad Underwood for scheduling not only a non-con game like late. I mean, this is late in the regular season, right? And obviously we don't have the conference schedules yet for either the Big Ten or the ACC. But I mean, this is a Saturday on the back end of conference season, and we got to imagine they're both going to be tired. And so just big shout out to both coaches for scheduling not only a non-conference game, but a massive game at MSG, oh, by the way. And so very, very grateful for that. Andy, as you had noted and we had talked about it, it reminds us of the game that Gonzaga and Kentucky had last season. That was in February as well, right? If I remember.
Yeah, I think it was like February 17th. So basically around the same weekend.
And so here's what I like about this is you just get so, and even though our conferences are bloated, you get so used to playing these teams in your conference. It's kind of like same old. And so it really does break things up in a nice way. And I'm curious to see what kind of effect it has on net rankings, right? Because the net rankings get so incestuous, if I can use that term, after the non-conference slate. And so man, this is good for our sport. So kudos to these two schools.
Yeah, agreed. And I think, you talked about the kind of the monotony, as it were. And yeah, the conferences are a little bit bigger. And yes, we'll probably see a little bit less of that monotony. But especially in late February, like pretty much every team that you're playing at that point, you've probably already played them. Again, expanded conferences means that that's going to be a little bit less common. But by the third week in February, you're unlikely to be playing new teams. And I think to be able to challenge yourself to play in a new venue, to kind of have an elevated just sort of feel to the game because you're playing at Madison Square Garden, you're playing a non-league opponent. I just think it adds kind of an element of sort of breaking up, like you said, breaking up that monotony, but also can kind of reinvigorate your team a little bit. And you mentioned that Gonzaga Kentucky game last year, and that game was a really big turning point in the season for Gonzaga in particular. Obviously, Kentucky had been struggling. They kind of went up and down throughout the year last year. They'd already lost some games much worse than losing to Gonzaga, but the Zags really needed that game. That they didn't pick up the wins that they needed to in the non-conference previously. And if that game hadn't been on the calendar, that could have been a very, very different season for Gonzaga last year. So obviously they're in a different situation as their conference slate is not as strong as either Duke's or Illinois', but it's still a good opportunity for either Duke or Illinois to potentially kind of, shift their season back into gear. If either of them have kind of lulled at any point in their conference slate, you go out there, if Duke picks up a huge win over Illinois, it could kind of jumpstart them for the rest of the season. I wish more teams would do this. I understand, especially in an era of conference expansion, the way that it has been, that it's probably going to be difficult to see more of these games. But I'm like you said, shout out to Duke and Illinois for getting this one on the calendar. Hopefully we'll get to see more like this going forward.
Andy, I'm also curious to see, we've got that game at Arizona and the Kansas game in Las Vegas. That's Friday, November 22nd and Tuesday, November 26th. So that's leading into Thanksgiving. That's the weekend before. I wouldn't be surprised at all if Duke just stays out on the West Coast, goes from Arizona just onto Las Vegas, gets some practices in and stays there. We'll obviously see, but I mean, for their sake, that seems to make a ton of sense to me. Andy, another thing I notice is that, we've got Duke and Auburn in the ACC SEC Challenge. That's on Wednesday, December 4th. I checked out North Carolina's ACC SEC game. They're also at home against Alabama, funnily enough, but it's on the same night. Obviously, they're going to play at different times, but it would have made a lot more sense to me had they put one of these on Tuesday and one on Wednesday. That way, they're both the highlight game of that night, and that way national media could be able to cover both games. I know it's a short distance between the two schools, but you can't really get from one to the other to cover each game thoroughly. And so that just seems like a scheduling miss to me.
Yeah, especially with, it's not just Duke and North Carolina, who are obviously the two premier programs in the ACC, but it's Alabama and Auburn. And I don't know if you're not going to make a strong argument that they're the bigger brands than like Kentucky or others in the SEC, but they're really good teams. So yeah, in my mind, those two games could have been not standalone, but obviously could have been the featured game in the ACC SEC Challenge on each day. And it's a little disappointing to see them not get that done. But I'm not going to be too mad about watching 4 straight hours of ACC SEC basketball on that Wednesday. It's going to be a fun day.
It really will. Andy, we've talked about how great this schedule is. Here's a big part of why. It's 11 non-conference games, the 6
Mhm.
bye games, as Andy talked about.
Mhm.
But of the other 5, Andy, all of them are against high major competition,
Yeah.
all of whom, oh, by the way, are ranked in the top 23 preseason at Torvik. We've
Mhm.
got Kansas 4th, Auburn 7th, Arizona 10th, Illinois 20th, and Kentucky 23rd. And like, good grief, Andy.
Mhm.
3 of those are neutral site, 1 on the road at Arizona, and then the Auburn game is the home game. I love that. Some of it is preordained. Like the Champions Classic is always going to be there.
Mhm.
Duke's always going to face a high level team in the ACC SEC
Yeah.
challenge. We knew the Arizona game because of the home and home
Mhm.
agreement. But I love them taking on the Illinois game, and I love them taking on the Kansas game. Those were the two, like, all right, here we go. And it's a sign to me that Jon Scheyer believes in this team and
Mhm.
wants to push and challenge them with a young, talented team surrounded by an experienced, kind of supporting cast, if I
Yeah.
can call it that. And so this is a good sign for me, and I think will mean big things for Duke.
Yeah, I think this Duke team is prepared to. I mean, they're going for it this year. They want to win it all. They know that they have the talent. They know that they have the combination of young stars and veteran presence and role players. And in order to kind of one of the last pieces in putting together a championship roster, you got to challenge your team.
Yeah.
And Jon Scheyer is absolutely, unquestionably willing to do that here. And I look at this 11-game schedule, and despite how great it is, despite those 5 teams in the top 23, I still think Duke's going to come out of this thing looking great. I have them projected to go 9-2. I don't know exactly which 2 games they'll drop. I think they're going to drop one of the games at Arizona or against Kansas in Vegas. I don't know that they go 2-0 in that stretch. After that, maybe they drop. Maybe Kentucky surprises some people. That's an early game for a Kentucky roster that hasn't played together.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that might be a bit of a challenge for the Wildcats there. Maybe the Auburn team is able to pick them off. Who knows? But if this team can go 9-2 in this non-conference slate, that puts them in an incredible position to be a number 1 seed coming into March, assuming they don't, have any significant problems in conference play.
Yep. I had it at 8-3, Andy, but basically with all the exact same logic that you just
Mhm.
used. How funny would it be if Duke goes to Arizona and wins, meaning that both teams would have won on each
Yeah.
other's home floor, Arizona beating Duke and Cameron last year.
Yeah.
But it just, I legitimately don't see them getting tripped up in any of those 6 bye games.
Mhm.
And who knows, right? That's what college basketball is. But
Right.
that 5-game slate, even if they went 2-3 against all those highly ranked opponents, that is an admirable job
Mhm.
of navigating that and would still be impressive to me. And I think, as you said, would still be in great shape for a high seed in the NCAA tournament because they're going to have a great year in the ACC.
Well, Isaac, the Pac-12 may not exist anymore, but that is not stopping the 2 best programs from squaring off over the next couple of seasons. We're going to talk more about that in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about FanDuel. I love sports. Isaac loves sports. If you're listening to a podcast here in mid-August, I know that you love sports too, and we never want them to stop. But in the dog days of summer, we're getting fewer games. The Olympics are over. The sports just are not sportsing like we want them to. However, FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all their customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And if you're looking ahead to those national championship odds, if you're feeling good about Duke after that conversation, they are tied at the top with the best odds to win it all in 2025 at plus 1,000. It is Duke, UConn, and Kansas. All in that conversation. Alabama comes in next at plus 1,300. Houston behind them at plus 1,600. And then 3 programs tied at plus 2,000. That's Baylor, North Carolina, and the Zags. So, folks, head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, Isaac, continuing our conversation on scheduling, as that's kind of the big thing that's coming out here in August as we kind of see some updates on non-conference schedules getting finalized, neutral site games getting scheduled for this upcoming season, all sorts of kind of fun stuff. And we took a look at Duke's schedule, a fantastic non-conference slate for them. And one of the games they're playing is Arizona. And so we're going to kind of move the conversation to talk about Arizona, and in particular, a 3-game series-ish, 3 scheduled games, I suppose we should say, over the next 4 years between Arizona and their longtime conference rival or conference foe, UCLA, the 2 best teams consistently in the Pac-12 for the majority of the Pac-12's 100+ year existence, quite frankly. And so it's obviously weird. We've talked about it a handful of times on the show, the uniqueness of seeing these Pac-12 teams schedule non-conference games against each other, because we're just not used to that being how it goes. But we've seen 3 games in the next 4 years between Arizona and UCLA, which is, of course, now a Big 12 versus a Big 10 matchup. The first one will be this season, December 14th. It'll be in Phoenix at the Footprint Center, so it'll be a neutral site, a pseudo-neutral site game, obviously favoring Arizona in that matchup. Again, December 14th in Phoenix. 2025, these two teams are set to meet in the Hall of Fame series in Las Vegas. That's a true neutral site for those two teams. And then they'll skip 2026, or at least they don't have a game scheduled right now for that season.
Weird? That's
yeah,
so
it's kind of
weird,
weird, right? 3 and 4 years is just clunkier to say, but that's apparently how it's set up for now. And then in 2027, they are planning to meet in Los Angeles. Where is to be determined. I'm thinking they're probably going to look at the Intuit Dome, which is where Gonzaga and UCLA are going to meet this year. And then
is that the Clippers' new place?
It's the Clippers' new place. Yeah, the Gonzaga UCLA game, by the way, will be the first college basketball game played at the Intuit Dome, so that's going to be fun. But I wouldn't be surprised if that's where we get this 2027 game again. It'll be in LA, so it'll be that kind of return pseudo home and home series in Phoenix and LA, but not actually at the home floors. And that's kind of the if I'm going to be nitpicky, and if I'm going to be pedantic, and I am going to,
you should be.
I'm going to do those things. Why, just play these games at home? I know why they don't. I get the net ranking aspect of it. I understand that there's more butts that you can get in seats at the Footprint Center and wherever they end up playing in LA than on the home floors. But
crypto. I wanted it crypto.
Maybe it'll be at crypto, but either way, why not play it at Poly or McHale? Why not play it? These teams have already played each other. It's not like they're unfamiliar. They played each other every other, twice a year for decades on this same floor. So I understand the logistics. I don't need somebody to explain to me why they're not playing each other at home. I just wish more teams would be willing to do that and overlook the potential benefits of ticket sales and other stuff. But I know that that's not how it works. It's just hard to see these two teams that have had some great matchups on each other's home floor now choosing to continue the series, which is great, but not doing it in those same environments.
Especially, Andy, since we have that middle year at a neutral site in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
That seems to me like what would be the thing that would allow you then to play the other games true campus sites. And look, I know in LA, a college basketball game ain't the hottest thing going all the time because there's so many other shows in town, whatever, fine. But if you're going to schedule a series where you've already got a third game at an alternate neutral site, then put these games at home, for crying out loud. I do, I joked about a second ago. I would love to hear the behind the scenes about why it's not just 3 straight years. There's got to be something scheduling wise that doesn't work and whatever. But heck, by 2027, they could be back in the same conference. But I'm excited that they're doing this. I hate that with the breakdown of the Pac-12, we do have to now non-conference schedule these two teams to play each other. But I'm glad that Coach Lloyd and Coach Cronin are committed to doing so.
Got a couple other kind of fun former Pac-12 matchups that are now no longer going to be, or at least one more. The San Jose Tip-Off event, which is going to be at the SAP Center in San Jose. That is the home of the San Jose Sharks, which I learned while doing research for this show that they call it the Shark Tank, which is an incredible nickname for a venue that plays with that has the San Jose Sharks in town. 2 games scheduled for the San Jose Tip-Off: Stanford versus Oregon, which is now an ACC versus Big Ten matchup, and then Cal versus San Diego State, which again, Cal joining the ACC, so that'll be ACC versus the Mountain West. Stanford versus Oregon, obviously similar to the UCLA Arizona conversation, longtime conference foes, longtime opponents in the Pac-12, now facing each other at a neutral site in San Jose, outside of conference play. Added element of intrigue is Brandon Angel transferring from Stanford to Oregon this offseason, so he will be facing his old team. And then, of course, it's a pseudo road game for the Ducks. I mean, they're playing Stanford in San Jose. That's certainly going to be an advantage for the Cardinal in terms of location. I don't know that I would be betting that there's going to be more Stanford fans than Oregon fans there, just because of how Stanford fans traditionally travel. Although I don't think that Oregon has a rabid basketball fan base necessarily, but you never know. That should be a fun game. I'm excited to see if Kyle Smith in his first, one of his first big tests that he's going to face as the coach at Stanford, if he can kind of pick up a potential marquee win here against Dana Altman and the Ducks. Cal and San Diego State, that's a fun matchup as well. I'm glad to see Cal kind of putting some challenging games on the non-conference. Again, we kind of joked about this earlier. A lot of teams that are moving into bigger conferences or that have already made that move, like BYU or Houston, two schools that we've kind of touched on their non-conference schedules in the past, being not as competitive as they typically are because they now have a much more competitive conference slate. Cal's in a position where they could probably ease up on the non-conference slate and still pick up opportunities to get big wins in conference play. But they go out, they're going to take on San Diego State. That's a fun game. I'm excited to see those two teams square off. And I think, honestly, both these two games, it's not going to blow people away as a, single event, but it's a pair of fun basketball games on the West Coast.
Yeah. And thinking of this Stanford, like San Jose, like Palo Alto is closer to San Jose than San Francisco, right? Like it's really close right there. And Berkeley just on the other side of the bay. So that'll be really cool. Andy, we were joking beforehand that the SAP Center, like I was like, is that sponsored by the company that provides the secondary audio program? But I looked up what it actually is. You ready for this?
I am.
SAP is a German software company. Systemie Anwendungen und Produkte in der Datenverarbeitung, which translates to systems, applications, and products and data processing.
I'm glad they went with SAP.
So yeah, I'm good with SAP or the Shark Tank. I just thought that's hilarious. We're like getting German software companies getting the naming rights for
what a world.
Welcome to Silicon Valley. Andy, yeah, man, super excited for these games. As you said, I think that's the most standout thing to me is that Cal is going to push itself here, despite the fact that they've got a more challenging ACC schedule and going to be flying out all over the country all the time. So this is good that they get a game pretty close to home here. Just got to drive around a big body of water to get to it. Anything else from you on these games before we keep rolling?
Yeah, I'm excited for some. I'm glad that the West Coast teams are willing to keep playing each other. Like I said, I'd like to see more home and homes, but that feels a little nitpicky. I think for people who are Pac-12 basketball fans, just the opportunity to see UCLA and Arizona, Stanford and Oregon. I know Cal San Diego State was never a conference game, but it's still a good matchup between West Coast teams. I think it's good for the sport that those matchups are still continuing to happen. It's good that, Gonzaga and UCLA are going to face each other. Like, I think it's important that some of those regional rivalries, whether they were conference matchups or not, are going to be maintained in an era where obviously travel is now changing significantly with conference realignment. So I think it's good that these types of games and events are still getting put on the schedule.
Yeah, it's funny that the conference games are the less geographically sensible, and now it's the non-con games that are the geographically sensible. Oh man, Andy, Shaka Smart, and Marquette, they might be allergic to utilizing the transfer portal, but man, I tell you what, Coach Smart has found plenty of reinforcements in now what is a top 10 ranked class in 2025. We're going to talk about that and some good news for Georgetown coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about Game Time, Andy and I both love MLB games, whether it's honestly major, minor games, whatever. But doing that in the summer is one of our favorite all-time things. Man, it's the game, it's the food, the family, friends, everything part of the experience. And we're both excited to make those kind of all-new memories again this summer. But thankfully, when we want to go, we don't have to sweat getting high-priced last-minute tickets because Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. In fact, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with killer last minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Andy, we talked about Duke earlier, man. We got that Champions Classic coming up Tuesday, November 12th at State Farm Arena in Atlanta. Duke against Kentucky and Kansas against Michigan State. Cheapest ticket I found, $157. That ain't bad for this two games. But the super deal right now, lower level tickets in section 104 row R for $269. And that to me is a really good deal. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time, download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. This offseason, Andy and I have talked about how Marquette and Purdue are the only two high major teams to literally not take anyone in the transfer portal. It still boggles my mind that that's where we're at, but it is where we're at. And I love it because Shaka Smart is out here saying, all right, y'all keep getting all your transfers. I'm going to just start stockpiling high school dudes, training them up, and that's how we're going to go about it. And they do so most recently by adding four-star shooting guard Adrian Stevens as part of their 2025 class. Andy, let us know about Homie from Maryland.
Yeah. So Stevens is a 6'4" guard from Maryland, the 94th ranked player in 24/7 Sports' 2025 class rankings. He's 120th in their composite ranking, so they're a little bit higher on him than the consensus. A player that Shaka was pursuing for a long time. They initially made an offer to him in I think it was the fall of 2023. Wow. They had him on campus for an unofficial visit. They then had him on campus again for an official visit. He picked Marquette over Georgetown. We'll talk about Georgetown a little bit later, as well as Notre Dame and Villanova. So Stevens was looking hard at Big East schools, looking hard at Notre Dame, ultimately decides to go to Madison to go play for Shaka Smart at Marquette. Fourth commitment for Shaka's class in 2025. They have one other player in the top 100. That's Nigel James, a 6-foot point guard. He's 86th in the class. Stevens is 94th. Then you have a 6'7" small forward, Ian Miletek, who is 103rd in the class. All three of those guys are 4-star rated prospects. And then they have 6'6" small forward Michael Phillips joining the class as well. 3-star prospect, 208th in the class. And I think you can look at this class. You can look at the rankings. And again, 2025 is a little farther away. So those rankings are bound to shift in many cases somewhat dramatically, and think, well, that's, nobody in the top 85, nobody in the top 75. And you kind of, not feeling super confident about it, but I would caution that Shaka's really good at developing talent. And the whole staff is excellent at this. The amount of players that have come through Marquette's system that are now in the NBA that were high level, all Big East caliber players who were ranked similarly coming out of high school. I mean, it's commonplace. And Shaka knows what his skill set is. He knows that the player development is a huge area of success for their program. And the reason they have had so much success recently has been on the back of 2, 3, 4, 5-year players within the program. Obviously, it's harder to continue to build that in the transfer portal era for most coaching staffs, but it hasn't really impacted Marquette. We talk about them not bringing in a lot of transfers. They're also not losing a lot of guys in the transfer portal. They're developing. I mean, they lose Kolek and Oso from last year's team, but they're going to be reloaded with Cam Jones is going to step into a bigger role. He could be an All-American next year. This is a team that they've kind of continued to have the same style of next man up mentality, and it has continued to work for them. So you may look at this class and see a bunch of players who are, low 4 stars, not in the top 80, and think, oh, is that really going to work out for Shaka? I'm going to tell you right now, I wouldn't bet against it.
Andy, I wouldn't either, because I'm looking back right now. Cam Jones, you just talked about. This is exactly what I was looking for. Class of 2021. You know where he was ranked at 247?
80 something?
107th.
Oh, wow.
This dude we're talking about as one of the best players, not in just the Big East, but in college basketball this year. If that right there alone isn't enough example for you, then I don't know what else you need. And as you said, I think the key point here is recognizing what a good developer of talent Shaka is, to say, we know what we're looking for. I don't care what your rankings are. And look, for example, Andy, I was listening to an interview with Adam Finkelstein from 247 Sports earlier this week, and he was talking about just what an inexact science it really is, right? Let me give you another example. Oso Ighodaro. I just got back to the class of 2020. Where was he ranked? 81st at 247 Sports. And so
Tyler Kolek was unranked.
Yeah,
not even ranked.
That's the perfect 3 examples. And so if you doubt what Andy just talked about with these 4 guys all outside the top 85, well, it's no different than Oso Ighodaro, Tyler Kolek, and Cam Jones. So doubt Shaka.
It's worth acknowledging that Kolek did transfer to Marquette, and
that's
I think
fair.
That is an important distinction, but still, the sentiment still stands, especially with the other 2 guys.
Yeah. So doubt Shaka at your own risk. That's the biggest takeaway from this, because it's so wild to me that he's doing it without getting, and it's not even like, oh no, he's not getting top five-star talent. It's not even like top 50, Andy.
Yeah.
And they're developing it at a high level. So there we go. Andy, let's stay in the Big East. Talk about some additions for Georgetown and Coach Ed Cooley. The first of which is one of my favorite nicknames here in a little while, the Juice. Julius Halafanua. I never say his last name right, and I always second guess myself. But Halafanua is from New Zealand. He's a Kiwi, similar to Johnny Furphy last year. Really blew up at the NBA Academy games in Atlanta this year. This was his second year. He played in them last year, but really was a standout this year. He's a 7-footer, 290-pound big guy that can facilitate, that can score. And it's, you might think, oh, well, he's just going to Georgetown. Well, sure, but he was getting attention from other high-level, high-major schools. So to me, this is a massive get. After reclassifying, he's a 25 kid, reclassified to 24, is 59th in the class. I'm telling you, Andy, just watch what happens with this, because there's a lot of potential for Juice. But he is not the only one that Ed Cooley landed recently.
Yeah, they landed Juice. They landed Jaden Fort as well. He also reclassified from 25 to 24. So I think we saw Ed Cooley and Georgetown were pretty heavily in pursuit of some front court additions throughout the offseason. They lose Supreme Cook to the transfer portal, and you could just kind of feel that they were any big man that was in the portal. They were connected to. They'd been recently connected to Jean Claude, who of course went to North Carolina, and so I think that Cooley realized he wasn't going to get the pieces that he wanted, and so he managed to convince a pair of 2025 prospects to reclass to 2024 to join his team right away. You don't typically do that unless you anticipate those players playing a role for you right away. I think in the case of Juice, I think he's a sneaky one and done candidate. I know he's only ranked 59th in his class, but I think if he gets the playing time.
Reed Shepard says hi.
Yeah, exactly. If he gets the playing time, I mean, he's 7 feet. He operates in the high post. He can facilitate. He can put the ball on the deck a little bit. We got to see how those skills translate at the collegiate level. But if Cooley is willing to play this kid significant minutes right away, he could be a really nice piece for them as a freshman. And Jaden Fort there's a little bit less optimism of his immediate impact for Georgetown. He also reclassified, like we said. He's unranked prospect right now, 3-star from Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So he's
and that's key. He's a D.C. kid.
Yeah, he's a D.C. kid. That's why Cooley wanted him, and that's something that Cooley really wanted to do when taking over at Georgetown, was kind of keep hometown kids around and kind of build up a local following for the team that has kind of been disillusioned from the Patrick Ewing era. And getting a kid like Jaden Fort, he may not be a huge needle mover for this program, but he helps in that regard as well. He's also just a body. He's 6'8". He's a big dude. He may not be ranked, but there was some other high major programs interested in him. I think he's maybe a sneaky riser who now, instead of getting another year to develop in high school and potentially move up the rankings, comes to college right away, gets opportunity to play at the D1 level, or at least work, get better in practices, things like that. So I like this class. I like these two new kind of late additions for Ed Cooley's team. They're combined with a transfer portal class that I'm incredibly intrigued by. And I say intrigued, not necessarily because I think it's automatically going to be really good, but because everybody has a little bit of kind of sneaky upside. Malik Mack comes from Harvard. Love him. Love what he did at Harvard. Think he's going to translate just fine. Micah Peavy's kind of your do-it-all jackknife 3-and-D wing from TCU. Then you get Curtis Williams from Louisville and Jordan Burks from Kentucky. Neither guy played all that much at their previous stops. Williams a little bit more so at Louisville, but everything was kind of a mess there. Jordan Burks, not a super highly regarded recruit, didn't play a ton at Kentucky, but anytime you can get a guard who spent a year in John Calipari's system, I think you take that and you see how did you improve? What are things you worked on? How can we kind of take some of that with us to our program? And so I think if nothing else, Burks is a good addition in terms of kind of getting some insight into that program. So I like this class. I like what Ed Cooley's building. Do I think Georgetown's going to be a top 7 team in the Big East? Probably not, but there's a chance that they can kind of start to slowly chip away and start to rebuild some of that goodwill with what Ed Cooley's done this offseason.
It's going to be fun to watch. Hopefully Georgetown can make some moves in the Big East this year. I'm excited to see it.
Folks, that's going to wrap it up for us today and for this week. Here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, I want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Tell you all to enjoy your weekend. Come back with us next week. We got some recruiting updates we'll get to, some more scheduling stuff as it starts to come together. All that coming up next week on the show. Until then, though, of course, apologies as always to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats. And until Monday, peace out.